Welcome to CareHero podcast, where our mission is to educate, motivate, and inspire nurses and other healthcare professionals. In each episode, we explore how our guests successfully advance their careers and improve the lives of their patients and residents. We share practical tips and success stories to illustrate how you, our care heroes, can grow in your own personal and professional lives.
Welcome back, Care Heroes. We're your hosts, Martin Hoy.
And I'm Gerard Hernandez. We've got a pretty fantastic guest on today's show.
That's right. We have Kevin Knoblock, a nurse practitioner and clinical scientist hailing from Beantown, the cradle of liberty, Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes, we do, Martin. And he's got some fantastic bits of knowledge and tips to share. Some of these include the joys and rewards of being a nurse practitioner, how a nursing degree can lead to a wide range of exciting professional opportunities outside of bedside nursing, the importance of a positive attitude and kindness when it comes to treating patients, and how healthcare professionals can use their clinical experience to assist nonprofits like the Human Rights Campaign.
Sounds great, Gerard. Let's do this. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to introduce Kevin Knoblock today to today's episode, Care Hero podcast. Kevin is a nurse practitioner, gastroenterology at Massachusetts General Hospital, and a clinical scientist, clinical development and operations at AMAG Pharmaceuticals, both in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
So, Kevin, we always like to start off with this question. All of our care heroes, including yourself, are superheroes. But if you had to choose one superpower, what would that be and why?
Back to my childhood, I always wanted to be Superman. And I think he has a lot of different superpowers. I liked him the most because he didn't need any utility belts or anything like that. He was just core superpower. But I always wanted to fly. I think it's just cool to just sort of, be free of gravity, any constraints, just kind of fly over, see the countryside as well. And just always, you can get places quicker and get things done a lot quicker during your day. So flight was always one of my maybe sort of wants of a superpower.
When I dream, I fly half the time. So I totally get that.
Kevin, you have such an amazing and deep educational and professional background. But first, let's start with your educational background. Take us back from your Bachelor of Arts in German Studies, and how did you eventually get into healthcare?
As an undergrad, I was liberal arts, didn't know exactly where I was going to go, took, many different classes. And I hate to admit my German literature and language major, firstborn here from Germany, actually. So I took a lot of German classes. And then junior year, they're like, if you don't pick a major, you're going to be here longer than you want. And I summed up how many credits I had and what the path of least resistance was. And that was German. I knew I wanted to do something later on in life, grad school. So I was like, not a problem. And then started working at Mass General in a couple different capacities. I was a clinical research coordinator and a couple other, functions, administrative at the hospital. And then kind of got talked out of clinical care. I liked my time as a clinical research coordinator. I got to work with patients, enrolling them in trials. They were excited to be a part of something where, they were going to be helpful to people in the future. But I hate to say at that time, this was sort of the late 90s and docs were kind of down on healthcare. Managed care was still kind of in the air. And I kind of got influenced, I kid you not, to go off to business school because it was quicker, no qualifying exams, and you'd make more money. That's kind of what they told me. But I did like the administrative component of healthcare because I thought it needed a lot of sort of refinement, to make operations better. So I went to University of Minnesota. I did a master's of healthcare and a master's of business administration while I was there in my 2 years, and then came back and in some administrative roles at both Mass General and at Brigham and Women's for a short period of time. And then decided to go back and get my nurse practitioner license. And then after that completed, I started my first job as a nurse practitioner at Mass General in the GI unit, specifically on the inpatient consult team, is kind of my quick overarching history of my educational and, professional background to date.
Modest, but that was a lot of hard work. Do you have any advice for any listeners now that were thinking about taking this kind of educational path that you just did?
I knew I never wanted to be some fancy surgeon. I was going to be either primary care or some specialty. And, the nurse practitioner route seemed to be a perfect route to get me to what I actually wanted to do every day. So I was very happy with it. And the nice thing about nursing is that you can kind of chisel away at it part-time and work your way up there. Obviously, it might take a little longer, but you don't have to take 4 years off to go to medical school and pack up your life. And, I was 37 when I went back to get my nurse practitioner license, and I was already married. Didn't want to have to uproot me and the husband. And, it was just too much chaos. So I could stay right here, do my education. And there was so many great hospitals here to choose from. And Mass General already knew me, so it just seemed like the easiest way to do this.
Yeah, perfect fit.
Did you also complete your Bachelor of Science in Nursing and a Master of Science in Nursing at the same institute?
Yeah, so we do get a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing during the first 3 semesters, and we do the NCLEX exam, and then we move on to the second half of the program where we get our Master's of Science in Nursing. So yeah, I racked up quite a few degrees, still paying Sally Mae for them, but they were worth it.
And how many years in total was that?
It was only 3. It went by quick. I really did enjoy it. I really did like what I was doing a lot. It was, something I had thought about. I don't want to say gave it up, but, kind of postponed it, obviously, put it on the back burner. And then when I was in administration, there was still something I was missing. I thought like this really rounded out the whole part of me, the administrative side from the MBA being in healthcare administration. And I'm not going to lie, there were some doctors that would say to administrators like, well, you don't know how it really works because you've never seen a patient. You've never been at the bedside. And now I'm like, I have. So, I'm kind of equal at the table in certain respects.
So, Kevin, could you tell us a little bit about your journey as a nurse practitioner at Mass General? What roles did you have and how did that journey evolve?
So my first job right after school, I was on the inpatient consult team. There was 3 fellows, an attending physician, myself. We basically sort of ran the list of patients from the day before every morning. Pages would come in throughout the day, usually in the morning after the residents on the floors rounded on their patients. If there were GI issues they wanted some input on, they would send it to the pager. I was actually the triage person as well. And then we would just assign all the consults out evenly amongst the team. And we'd go out, run, see our patients. And then we'd usually huddle quickly around noon just to update everybody. Then we'd head back out, come back in around 4:30. And then we would run the list entirely because I was lucky in the sense that I was never on call overnight. One of the fellows took that responsibility. So we all had to sort of run the list and just update whoever was on call so they knew what was going on if they got that page in the middle of the night. So it was just, seeing the patients, evaluating them, getting them on our endoscopy schedule for colonoscopies, upper endoscopies if they needed procedures. So just anything GI related.
For our nursing students who don't have a lot of experience in the hospital, could you just explain really briefly what gastroenterology involves?
Anything in the digestive tract, pretty much from, the mouth to the bum. There's a lot of organs in the middle there too, usually, the liver, gallbladder. We spleen too. If there's any pain, I always would joke with patients. I'm like, there's a lot of other stuff, especially with female patients. So there could be other issues going on. But if there's like abdominal pain, like usually GI would get the page. A lot of times we would sort things out that weren't GI. And then we would have to sort of pass it along to like the OB/GYN team. But yeah, pretty much anything stomach related, let's say.
Kevin, AMAG Pharmaceuticals, how did you get into that current role?
Sure. A good friend of mine, he was actually a physician, practiced for a few years a while back, and he had been sort of trying to get me to come work with him for probably at least 5 years. And is in medical affairs, which is mostly a group that does educational strategy for, new pharmaceuticals that are coming on the market. So a lot of MDs, PhDs. So he kind of wanted me to come sort of start up the department when I hit AMAG. It was kind of sort of burgeoning. So it was more business oriented. So I finally gave in about a year and a half ago. And I said, all right, we'll give this a try. But I still do a little per diem work at Mass General because, it is something I really love. And, I spent a lot of time, effort, money to get that degree. But yes, I've been in the pharmaceutical about a year and a half now.
So utilizing that skill set from business school primarily here at AMAG?
Yeah, so to have that clinical background that, the PhDs, they're great. They're they put a lot of our scientific platforms together, really detail oriented, but then you kind of want that clinician perspective to kind of be a little bit of the translator sometimes to the bedside clinician. So that's what the medical affairs group kind of at a high level does. So I was excited to join, kind of use both parts, just try something new again. Like I've had many chapters in my life. So this just seems like another chapter to try out, which is great with nursing is like, there's more than just bedside nursing. There's more than just outpatient clinic. There's just so much you can do, even without the MBA, by all means.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting home an important point, right? As long as you're willing to learn, there's opportunities out there. It doesn't have to just be a bedside nurse, and you can marry like your passion for business and clinical work together. And that's exactly what you've done.
True. Yeah, definitely. Especially here in the Boston, Cambridge area. There's so many great opportunities. I know we're very lucky in this area. A lot of major cities, though, will have similar opportunities as well.
So for our listeners that don't have an MBA, do you have any advice for how a nurse or other healthcare professional could get the opportunities that you had in various different roles?
if you're willing to learn, like you can take some classes. They have like certificate programs and just take, a little accounting course, finance course, some other, business courses. You don't have to spend 2 solid years in there. I mean, I think the biggest thing I learned, but again, I was a little bit on the older side than the average MBA. It's really learning how to work with people, work within a team, work within a system. It's just, you're not, just you like crunching data at a desk. You're really trying to learn how to work with others to accomplish a common goal.
Kevin, what's the biggest challenge you have with your current role and how do you overcome it?
I would say more so on the clinical side of things, clinical care. I would say there's probably some more obstacles there. On the inside, we kind of call it some administrative burden is sort of dealing with getting prior authorizations, which just add time to your day. And then in GI, especially when we have to order a lot of imaging like MRIs and CAT scans, we have to do peer-to-peer telephone calls to get an approval of like, why are you ordering this expensive MRI? So that does add a lot. But, try to utilize, again, as I said, MBA as a team, so is healthcare. Like we are part of a big team. You shouldn't feel like you're the only person there. In the GI group, we had a whole staff of RNs that would help and try to do as much of that as we could to just, everyone should sort of practice to the top of their license, as we always like to say, is, there's so many people in place. So they would do a lot of that for me, and then I would jump in when needed. But I mean, it still did add some time here and there. And, some people get a little, I don't want to say cranky, but, like, oh, that's administrative stuff I wish I didn't have to do. I didn't go to school for that. And I'm like, look, you're going to get that in any job. Trust me, I've had a few. You're going to have administrative stuff and stuff you don't like to do. But, there are ways. You just have to utilize all the resources around you.
Do you have any quick tips on how to get through the administrative burden?
Try to be as efficient as possible, especially when you're younger. You need to learn to be much more succinct. Use the technology. My older colleagues who don't even type, I don't know how they get through their day. Learning technology would probably be, a big time saver for a lot of people.
Thank you. That's a great tip. We love technology here at CareHero Podcast.
You have your hands on a lot of things like day to day. So there's a lot of things you have to learn or keep up with current news. How do you do that? How do you stay on top of learnings day to day?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going into healthcare, especially, frontline clinical care, it's really not a job, I would tell people. It's kind of like a career, if not a little bit of a lifestyle. You have to stay on top of things. Things are changing frequently. New drugs are getting, on the market, and drugs are getting much more complicated. These just aren't oral tablets we used to hand out. There's people giving themselves injections. We get IVs of like monoclonal antibodies. You just got to read. You got to sort of subscribe to the journals. And usually, Mass Journal is great. We have, a subscription to every journal known to mankind. But you do have to stay on top of it. You have to do your continuing medical education credits, stay on top of those. I mean, there's been years where I kind of left it to the end, and then like you're spending a month every night, like doing some online, which is nice. You can do online now. A long time ago, you had to go fly somewhere to Chicago and check in at the hotel and sit there for 2 days and listen to a lecture. So it's definitely easier to get those CMEs, but you have to be motivated and you want to learn, and you have to really find a field you find interesting because you have to keep up with it. There's no other way.
Yeah, it's a career. Like you said, right? You have to be motivated and have to learn. You have to be motivated to go take that extra effort to go learn.
For sure.
And Kevin, we get this question asked from time to time, especially those nurses and other healthcare professionals in their early or mid-career, in how to navigate communication with management. What do you think is the best way to work with management to further your career?
I think if you're having an issue, it's best to bring it up immediately. I've seen so many colleagues, like whatever the smallest issue is, they'll just trudge through it and they'll grumble and they'll just keep doing it. And they just get more and more frustrated. If it's a technological or if it's a staff issue, I mean, I think there's nothing better than open, honest communication, like all the time. And then, there needs to be a feedback loop. And again, you just have to approach it as a very factual situation and always come to the table, I think, with maybe some potential solutions. Like when I was on more of the management side, like people would complain and I'm like, well, do you have any ideas about it? Like, you're doing the work every day. What is it that's frustrating you? And like, maybe if you have some ideas, I can help you solve this a little bit easier.
That's great. Make sure you come in with suggestions. That'll help ensure that your issue is dealt with.
I mean, we all get cranky really quickly when something bothers us, but that just escalates things. One manager I had a long time ago, She was kind of like, be factual, not emotional, because when you start putting all this emotion into it, that's when things, I think, sort of spiral out of control a little bit. If you just keep it, just the facts, ma'am. And usually it's about the system. It's about the process. It's usually not about the people. Sometimes there's an occasion there is, but it's usually about the process that's not working.
It's about the facts, not the emotion. That's a great learning. I mean, you can take that in any career, whether it's in healthcare or like you in business, and it's a great thing to think about.
So you've obviously had a terrific career so far, Kevin. So what's the most inspiring moment you've had in your career?
There's been a few. I will say my career as a nurse practitioner, I've had the most rewarding parts that I have never found anywhere else. So I'm very grateful for that. There's been a lot of tough moments. And, there was one, I was somewhat, junior and went to go see some patient and heard his history. He had been seen at a smaller place outside of Boston, a smaller community hospital. And he kind of fit a certain profile, and I think he was a little dismissed. And when he finally came in, his whole story just, didn't sound right. And then long story short, we felt a mass on his abdomen. We scanned him and, found the beginnings of a pancreatic mass. So, to be able to find something somewhat earlier on for a patient is just, that's what you go into it for. Not that you ever want to find those things, but when you find it and the family is just, so grateful, so thankful. It's like, I'm just here doing my job. I'm glad I found it, and, hopefully things will work out. But yeah, that was probably one I'll always remember.
Kevin, you're saying that, the team found it, but this was directly your conversation with this patient that led you to believe that something else was happening here.
Yeah, again, he was, at a smaller, community hospital, and, he looked like he had a little bit of a rougher life. I could see where he might have been written off as like substance use and other things, but it just didn't add up for some reason. I'm like, there's just something else here. And there was maybe something on the abdomen, wasn't entirely sure, but, GI, we scan everybody is the joke. You don't make it through us without getting some sort of scan. And then, the nice thing about a place like, the team will come and we'll look at the radiology together and just go over it to make sure, we know what we're looking at. But you feel good that you caught something.
Just because you were more junior, that didn't prevent you. You went back to your training. You understood that there's something to look forward to. So I think that's also an inspiring message to our younger nurses here as well.
Really, a good chunk of it is listening to the patient. There are some sort of little not anecdotal, but there's some little studies out there that, the average healthcare person interrupts a patient. I think it's literally within 17 seconds of asking the first question. That's what we're there for, is to listen to what's been going on. Sometimes they've been waiting for a long time to come in to see you if it's in the outpatient world, but, they just want to tell their story and be heard. And so it's a lot of listening.
That reminds me, I believe you were part of the patient experience team at Mass General. How do you think that experience helped you become a better listener and a better practitioner?
Yeah, I've had my own needs in healthcare as well. So I've been on the other side as well. I've had Crohn's disease ever since I'm 12. And, sometimes I was dismissed, believe it or not, as like a hyperactive, high-strung child way back when, there's something going wrong. And I know there's nothing wrong with me. I did have a good bedside manner. That's how I kind of got recruited for the patient experience team. It's just, being there and just, talking to patients, it was a very different sort of piece of work I was doing. I would go in, how did your interactions go today? Did you understand what was being discussed with, put yourself in the patient's shoes to figure out what was going wrong. And I realized I was on the other side too. And the clinical care, it's it gets busy. You have so many patients to see. There's just so much going on. And you just people just sort of crank through that patient to get through the next, 12 they have before they have to round later on. So it was definitely helpful to put the patient's shoes on again, because we sometimes forget about that during our busy day.
And from that committee and initiative, what came out of that? And maybe could you describe some of the learnings that the team, the patient experience team, came up with?
So me and another coworker, she was actually a social worker, we'd go back and sort of give them feedback and sort of, kind of teach them how to ask questions and when to stop. But just to introduce yourself, who you are in this care team. Half the times patients can't even identify who's who. There's so many people coming in throughout the day, who you are, what team you're with, and what you're there to do for them. So just describing to the patients of what's happening, what to expect. I could tell you patients here today could come up with 100 other things they would rather be doing today than sitting in that bed. They didn't want to be here. And we have to make them feel welcomed and that they're being cared for. So just start with that.
It seems like basic stuff, but sometimes I think you could probably get caught up in the day to day, and it's good to get a reminder of the things that you'd expect just as a human being sitting in that chair.
So, Kevin, if you could do anything to improve healthcare in America, what would you do?
Wow, that's a toughie. Maybe some more cross-pollination with education to a certain degree. Physicians do their chunk. Nurses, they get educated in their silo. Nurse practitioners in a similar silo. Physical therapists comes to the bedsides. Again, team members. For the first time, some people have never worked with somebody else. Like they don't even know what's entailed in an NP. A lot of the attending physicians that are highly educated, like, oh, what sort of education? Like, what are you even qualified to do? It's getting there in terms of functionality. You're seeing a lot more team care. It's not just, the doctor comes in and blah, 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 and then the nurses follow the orders and do whatever. It's more of a team rounding. Maybe it's just a seminar here and there. It doesn't have to be like a full academic course by any means, but, have nurses spend a day following like a second-year medical student. And there's just a lot, especially when you're brand new. So
that's a great suggestion. You're right, because it really comes down to these teams and your ability to communicate, and you don't know who you're talking to in this brand new team. So yeah, we don't know how that can be done, but I think that's a great answer to this question of like something that we could change if it was possible. Yeah, integrate, cross-pollinate. Yeah.
And I did some outpatient later on. It's different. There's a huge team depending what the patient's issues were, but smaller community hospitals might be a little different. But again, I think somehow, being a more team-led.
That's terrific. That's a terrific answer. Thank you.
And what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I've worked with some of the most intelligent, clinical minds out there. You can have the smartest people around the table, but if you can't share the toys in the sandbox, nothing's going to happen. So, you need to communicate. And I think going back to that one boss of like, when you're communicating with people, be factual, don't be emotional. We do have to take care of this patient together. So you need to be able to communicate. There's still that, power differential, pecking order almost in some healthcare systems, and a nurse might be afraid to like bring up an issue, but that culture needs to be changed. Anyone on the team needs to bring forth something. But again, factual, not emotional, putting it succinctly.
Yeah, that hierarchy point, that was the prevailing view in business not that long ago. In most corporations in America, that has softened to some extent, and hopefully that gets reflected in hospitals and healthcare facilities as well.
Agree.
What is the best compliment you have ever received in your career?
When I was in the outpatient side of GI, I apparently had one of the highest patient experience scores. A lot of patients were just saying, thank you. Thank you for listening. And thank you for caring. I'm like, they're human. People always thank me for being kind.
To you, that comes natural. I think it's great that you're telling this to other people, because it is those little things that people just forget, even as they were doing the same thing at work every day. And sometimes, something so little as explain what you're about to do to me in my patient room, right? That goes such a long way.
Oh, I've seen the bad side where they just come after a patient with, they're like, oh my God, what are you doing? What's this coming at me? And it's like, just tell them what's going to happen. It will relieve a lot of anxiety and go a long way with building trust. You need them to trust you.
So Kevin, could you tell us about the Human Rights Campaign? I know you've been involved in that. What is that organization all about? And tell us about your involvement and experience.
I've been involved with the Human Rights Campaign probably for over 15, 16 years already. And I started volunteering. Then we were handing out postcards at the subway stations just to get people to sign on. And, Massachusetts is an easy sell to a certain degree. Back then, not as easy as it is now, but I couldn't imagine doing that like in Mississippi or something like that. But then I started volunteering more. I became their volunteer coordinator to kind of bring people on. And we had a steering committee. So HRC is headquartered. The full-time staff are in DC, and they have steering committees, about 31 throughout the US. We meet monthly. We do a lot of sort of work around LGBTQ equality, a lot in political. We try to put out awareness about politicians, try to elect fair-minded politicians who have LGBT issues, in mind. I was on the board for about 6 years. I did 3 terms. I'm thinking now with the change in election, it might be a little bit of an easier time for us. That we were worried for a while. Certain administrations aren't as LGBT friendly or focused. They are also responsible for something called the Health Equality Index. When you go in to see a patient, make sure you kind of be politely ignorant and try to use more vague terms like who's with you at home, who's most important to you, or don't assume like, oh, is your wife picking you up at discharge today? So just trying to teach people to just be a little more cognizant and just don't assume. But it's been a great group. It is a great group. And I'll probably continue to be a part of it for as long as they need me.
It just adds another layer of complexity in how you'd manage and deal with that patient. So it's great to be, to understand it so you can deal with those things.
Say you get to travel to the future. What does the future of nursing look like for nurse practitioners?
I thought nurse practitioners would really take over the bulk of primary care at some point in the future. We're not there yet, but I'm hoping, there'll be more NP, even RN nursing care, maybe more at home in the communities and trying to keep people out of the hospital. You get reimbursed for people in the hospital. You don't get reimbursed for keeping them out of the hospital. So I'm hoping, in the future, I think NPs could really be a big force in primary care. Like we could do so much better with prevention and wellness. Residencies might be something that's needed in the future as well, because medicine's just changing, evolving, getting more complex. And I hate to say some patients, they're getting a little bit sicker, they're getting more comorbidities. So there's just a lot to learn and know when you especially first hit the ground.
Wow, that's fantastic insight. And hopefully something like that would become more prevalent in the future of education for NPs. Yeah, it'll be interesting, once these waivers, like post-COVID, future post-COVID, if these waivers, including the ones that touch NPs, what stays and what gets taken away. So,
and Kevin, do you have any final thoughts or advice for our care heroes?
Be positive, try to smile, even maybe when you don't want to smile. You're going to have sometimes people that are not very happy. They're not going to want to be there. They're going to be a little closed. You might get family members that are not aligned. They're not cranky at you. They're cranky at what's going on. It's the system. There's something, what's taking so long. You're not really to blame by any means. So don't take that personally. They care that you're caring for them. So don't ever forget that. Take a moment. Step away if you need to. You're human. Take some time for yourself. Nursing 101 is like, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. So that has to be, I think, for anybody. So that's probably a huge piece of advice.
Fantastic words to live by.
What a great episode, Martin. Now it's time for the handover.
All right, Care Heroes, here are our top takeaways from this episode. Healthcare is not a job, it's a lifestyle. As things change and evolve, you have to keep learning. When it comes to communication with management, be factual and not emotional. Come to the table with potential solutions. Healthcare is not just about clinical work. There are amazing opportunities for healthcare professionals to work in the business of healthcare. Pursuing business education could be one way to start. And last but not least, be positive and kind, even when it's difficult. The simple act of introducing yourself to the patient, explaining what's being done to them, and being mindful to stop and really listen can make a huge difference to the patient experience.
Some terrific insight on this handover, Martin. We also want to thank you, our Care Heroes, for listening. And don't forget, rate our podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you want a shout out on a future episode, visit us at careheropodcast.com. Go to the Contact Us page and submit your name, role, and location for a shout out on a future episode.
That's right, Gerard. Now it's time for some shout-outs.
So shouting out to Connie, an occupational therapist from Los Angeles, Jensen, a registered nurse from New York City, and David, a medical doctor from Calgary, Canada.
All right, that's it, y'all. We'll be back soon. Same Care Hero time, same Care Hero channel.
Thanks for listening to Care Hero Podcast. Don't miss out on future content. Hit subscribe and rate us in your favorite podcast app. Also, remember to visit us at careheropodcast.com to send us your feedback, sign up for the newsletter, and nominate a Care Hero to be interviewed on a future episode.